honor, the pleasure of introducing my old boss. And so I came from WTVM, which is now a great asset, but it was a Raycom Media asset at the time. And I was thankful enough to work with Holly and work under Holly over at the station. Holly's been in the business for a long time, and she can talk to you about the different stations that she's been at, but she's been at multiple stations in the general manager position. She's also just recently been promoted to multi-station general manager, so it's nice to know people in high places. And you know, she's doing good things, big things over at Gray, and I think she's a great person. I would love for everybody to meet her and talk to her afterward, because I think she can give you some really good insight, not only about broadcast, but being a female in broadcast, because she came into television when it was a lot more difficult than it is today. So without further ado, General Manager, Vice President, Holly Steuart.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Well, Chris, it was a dark day when Chris decided to come to CSU. Dark day for WTVM. Fabulous employee. He was our news operations manager, which means he knew everything about how you do news, from the mics to the cameras to the cars to the live trucks, everything. Very, very knowledgeable individual, and now even more so in the academic world. So thank you for having me, Marion, especially for the invitation. I appreciate it. And I do manage actually 3 of the 4 local television stations here in town, and I can explain why that is. I manage WTVM, but I also manage WLTZ, the NBC affiliate, and the Fox affiliate, WXTX. In our size market, one company is not allowed to own more than 1 television station, so we can't own those other 2, but we can manage them in what's called a shared services agreement, which means we do everything for those stations, absolutely everything. Make them commercials, pay the bills. There is no physical station for those other 2 stations. Everything is combined at WTVM. So we produce news for them, we produce commercials for them, we produce promotional messages for them, accounting, engineering, absolutely everything that you need to do to make a TV station happen, except for one thing, and that's sales. Because the FCC and the Department of Justice say, well, that would be a monopoly. Now, meanwhile, don't forget, over here is Facebook owning Instagram, et cetera, but that's a whole other story. But when they look at local broadcasting through a very narrow lens, it's still federally regulated. The FCC regulates what we do. And it's basically, making sure we pay our dues, so to speak, our annual FCC fees, and that we run a certain amount of children's programming. That's their main concern lately. But there are other rules we have to follow, and that's part of my presentation today. But I just kind of wanted to let you know how it works. It's kind of unique. I'm the only station manager in Gray Television, which now owns over 120 television stations. It's the 2nd largest broadcast group in the country, and we're always looking for employees. The only station that manages 2 other non-owned stations. So it's a little bit unique. We have a great big tech area that we've built out at the station to handle broadcasting literally at the same time from one place, all 3 stations, plus the sub-channels, channels like Me TV or Antenna TV or CW, those kind of things. So before I start on this, does anyone have any questions about that? I know it's kind of a unusual topic, kind of a subtopic of a subtopic, but it's interesting that broadcasting these days, I just actually did a different presentation for the lifelong learning group over at the Turner Center on campus, and it was about the future of TV. A lot of people say, I don't watch TV anymore, but they go to our news app and watch a video that we created. So that's watching the news, that's watching our news. When there's severe weather, we also have a weather app, separate weather app, so you'd be likely to watch that as well. So there's lots of different ways people watch TV, and they don't even think about it sometimes. Yes?
Yeah, what you said about ownership is really fascinating, because those of us who are really not in the business of that, and we teach here, and I did not know that you basically
Yeah.
understood that the only thing that they do separately is sales.
And you know, the real reason for that is not that we want to, you know, suck up everything in the market and be in control, because we don't benefit from the sales, the ad time, the commercial time sales of those stations. But those stations, conversely, would not exist if we didn't do what we're doing for them, because local news is very expensive. Our local news budget is approaching $3 million. Other stations doing the same thing or trying to compete at the same level, they can't afford it. I mean, the Fox station, we've had a shared services agreement for them that predated me coming here almost 10 years ago. And they used to be in a separate building, but they couldn't even sustain that because it's so expensive.
So that means, I'm sorry, one quick back.
Yeah.
So in terms of on-air talent, technical staff, they're all yours now?
Yes. So now some people may only appear on one channel, but even that's probably not true anymore, because what we did was the other two stations had no news identity. They had no news traction. They had no news ratings. So, you know, to provide them with the #1 news source, News Leader 9, on, this is what I did. I extended the brand. So I call it News Leader 9 on Fox 54, News Leader 9 on Local 38, NBC 38. So that's kind of how we did that, so that it used to be when we just had the Fox station, and Chris can attest to this better probably than me, but between the 10 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news, we would furiously, frantically change the backgrounds and the graphics and the supers and the everything. And when I got there, I kind of went, why are we doing this? Because Jason Dennis is anchoring the 10 o'clock, and he's also our 11 o'clock anchor. That made no sense. And people would say to me, how does Jason get from the Fox station to your station? Because he's not at the Fox station. So I decided to tear down all that artifice and just say, look, this is what we are, this is who we are. So now we produce, for instance, a 4 o'clock news, the only 4 o'clock news in the market, on WLTZ only. So only people watching NBC 38 will see that newscast. But it's coming from WTVM, and it's using WTVM resources. And while we have their logo up for channel identification, everything else is the same. So that's the concept behind that. But going on to political advertising, I titled this What Every Media Professional * should know, because I think voters and citizens should know this too. And I was just telling Marion that just yesterday I got a call from a viewer, very upset that we were running this ad, that the one, I don't know if you guys have seen it, where it's actually a pro Senator Warnock ad. It's about Herschel Walker's alleged domestic abuse and so forth, and where his ex-wife says, he held a gun to my head, you know, that kind of thing. So these people were very, very upset about that. And I proceeded to explain to them why we had to run that spot and why we can't have any say in what it says. And that's kind of the whole theory of my talk today for all of you, to kind of let you in on some of these rules that a lot of people don't really know. So yes, TV stations have rules. And so what are the rules for, or what do they cover? And mostly it's candidates, PACs, and issues. So when it comes to candidates, legally qualified candidates, to be considered legally qualified, you have to publicly announce your candidacy. Filing it for inclusion on the ballot is considered a public announcement of your candidacy. And the reason that that's important is you have to be an official candidate to buy political advertising on a TV station at the lowest rates, which I'll explain later too. You have to meet the qualifications to hold office. So, for instance, a 16-year-old can't say, "Oh, I want to run for, Senate." And then you have to be qualified based on the laws of the state, or again, publicly announce your intention to be a write-in candidate. So, when it comes to PAC ads, which is the next kind of category, if there's a couple of rules here. So if a political ad is authorized by the candidate or the campaign, but it's paid for by a PAC, Political Action Committee, the ad must identify the person who paid for it and the state it was authorized by the candidate or campaign. So for instance, PACs can be like the Lincoln Project, which is kind of an anti-Trump PAC, right? Or it could be Americans for Prosperity, which is kind of like a conservative PAC. So they have to meet these kind of qualifications. Political ads not authorized by a candidate but paid for by a PAC have to contain a disclaimer, again saying who paid for the ad and indicating specifically that the ad was not paid for by any candidate or candidate committee. That's why you hear at the end of some of these ads, this ad was not paid. That's exactly why, because they have to disclose that. The idea is to inform the viewer and to keep everything on a level playing field. And I think actually among all the rules in broadcasting, political rules probably do that better than a lot of things. Years ago, they decided, this is a situation that someone could easily take advantage of. For instance, a candidate coming in with, so much money, they could buy up all the commercials in the market, and we can talk about that later if you're interested in that. But we don't let that happen for a number of reasons. But essentially, some of these rules are kind of meant to make sure something like that doesn't happen. And the third kind of area is what we call issue ads. And these are ads that may feature a candidate, but they're not paid for by candidates. And they also, these kind of ads are like, let's say someone was gonna push for a referendum on the ballot to legalize marijuana, right? Then the people behind that would buy an issue ad because that's the issue. Maybe it's abortion is another issue. So you have these issue ads that these political groups want to get a message out through those ads, and they have to play by some rules here. So stations do not have to air issue ads. In other words, we can say, I'm not going to run those ads. We don't do that for a couple of reasons, but if there was an issue ad that was, say, obscene, let's say someone swears all the way through it, we don't have to air that ad, and we probably would not air that ad. We'd probably tell the PAC or the people behind it, let me see another version of this ad. We're not going to run this one, And most issue ads, the people behind those ads know what the rules are, and they're not so inclined to walk on the edge of those because they know that we don't have to run those. Again, the idea with issue ads is designed to push voters one way or the other. Yes?
Sorry.
No, please.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on
Yeah.
these issues in terms of what you can reject and at what level that kind of decision?
Yeah. Well, maybe this might be an interesting example because it sure was intriguing to me when we had the runoff last January for the Senate seat that Warnock won. Or I guess there were two of them. It was Ossoff and Warnock. So in that election was held on January 6th. So from the time of the general election in November to January 6th, there are all these groups coming in trying to push voters one way or the other. And they weren't, candidates, obviously they were still advertising, but a lot of these PACs and people with specific issues that might be relevant to the voters of one candidate or another came into the market. And because we have to provide candidates with ad time, and we have to provide them with a lower rate that they have to pay, that's one kind of advertising. But issue advertising, technically we can charge whatever the market will bear. And because there was so much attention on that runoff, we, for the first time in the history of the station, and it may never happen again, we sold a few spots for $100,000 each. And some people think, oh, that's what it costs to be on TV all the time. No, you can be a television advertiser in this market for, a couple $1,000s a month. Our rates are really pretty low. So, but when it comes to issue advertising, we can charge whatever we want because it's pure supply and demand. So at that time, maybe there were some bowl games or playoff games in January or what have you. we were able to charge huge rates because the people behind those issue ads wanted to be in that game, guaranteed to run, not preemptable by another advertiser coming in and paying more. So issue ads are treated a lot different than candidate ads.
Yeah, but my question was more about what topics or what messages that you would consider so provocative or that which cannot be aired. So who makes that kind of an editorial decision?
Yeah, sorry about that. So, it would be made at the station level, at least in our company, because it's very decentralized. There isn't a lot of corporate stuff going on. There's no like push downs, you have to do this, you have to, On an issue like that, they would leave it to us primarily because we know the market and we know theoretically the community's, tolerance for certain things maybe. It would have to be something like really graphic or obscene for me not to run it, because I think everyone can have a different opinion of an issue, right? And so, that's fine. If someone wants to come in and say, legalizing pot is the stupidest thing ever, and people are devils that do it, or whatever, terrible things, I'd probably still run that ad. But if they started using the F word and everything else, I would not run that ad. So the content matters a lot. That's a good question. So there are three major concerns a TV station has so that we don't run afoul of these political rules. So the first thing is called classes of time, and then there's lowest unit rate that I mentioned, and then also censorship. But classes of time is an interesting concept because it really means how a television station sells its time. So, for instance, the overarching way to think of classes of time is preemptable time, meaning another advertiser comes in. If you buy a TV spot for $5, someone comes in and says, I'll pay you $10 for that same spot. We say, okay, and we notify the $5 guy, hey, someone came in and paid more for your spot. I'm sorry, is there somewhere else we can put you? And they'll either say yes or no, or they'll say, well, I'll pay 15. And it's total supply and demand. Broadcasting sales time is often compared to an airliner, right? And think of the 6 o'clock as the 6 p.m. news as a 6 o'clock flight. So that plane is taking off, that 6 o'clock news is gonna run and be over with the same time every single day, no matter if one person buys an ad in that newscast or 50 people buy an ad in that newscast. So we have a certain amount of time that we sell. It's actually about 16 30-second units, so about 8 minutes of commercial time for every half hour. So if you think about it that way, you can see that we have only so much advertising space to sell, and when it's gone, meaning when the Tuesday tonight 6 o'clock news happens and it's over, we can't go sell it and say, well, we could sell you that. Oh, no, we can't. It's gone. It's like you have a barrel of apples, and when they're rotted, they're gone. It's the same. It's simple supply and demand. That's really what's behind it. And so preemptible and non-preemptible are the two general classes of time. So non-preemptible means a candidate comes in and they say, what's your rate to be in the 6 o'clock news? And we say $150. If, right now, based on current demand, it's $150. However, if you pay $250, we will guarantee you that we will not preempt that spot. And not only that, we'll promise that if someone comes along with $300, we're still not going to preempt your spot because we're going to sell you non-preemptible time for $250. And they say yes, and we say thank you, and that's how they lock in their rate. They're not paying the lowest rate, because anyone paying the lowest rate is automatically subject to preemption. But if you pay a higher rate, you're protected from that. So does that make sense? So that's what preemptible and non-preemptible means. Also, classes of time correspond to how and when certain commercials are sold. So for instance, a fixed position in NFL football is going to, first of all, cost a lot more than a lot of other things. but it's a fixed position. So that's where a political advertiser might say, I want my spot to run at the first break, local break you have after halftime. That's where I want the spot. I don't want it before halftime. I don't want it in the fourth quarter. I want it right when the halftime break happens. And we say, yes, for that fixed position, that's going to cost you $1,000. Because we're going to go so high that other advertisers aren't going to want to afford it. And we'll already say it's sold. It's non-preemptible. It's already been sold at that rate. So the non-preemptible essentially is guaranteed to run. That's kind of really what it means. There's also a class of time called preemptible with notice, meaning whether the station has a policy, and you can set your own policies on this, but they're almost always the same. 24 hours notice, 72 hours notice. That is also, a class of time, because we're saying, look, your rate is good right now, but we may give you 72 hours notice that there's so much demand that's built up, it's going to kick your spot out. Do you want to pay more? And so that transaction goes on. And then there's preemptible without notice, which essentially is the cheap spots. And then run of schedule, which is rotator spots. So if you ever hear this term, run of schedule or rotator, it basically means if I'm a client of the TV station, I'm going to buy a spot, and I'm going to air this one spot, and I want it to run between 9 and noon, between 2 and 5, and between 7 and 11 at night. And that's what I'm buying. I don't want it to run at, whatever, 8 o'clock. I want it to run, or any specific time, or outside of those times. I don't want that. I want run of schedule at these times. And some of them say, I don't care where you put it, 24 hours a day, you can run it anywhere the TV station has time. So that's what run of schedule and rotator spots are. So there's different ways that we sell time. And again, remember that local TV stations only have one revenue stream, and that is our commercial time, whether it's now digital or on the air. Cable companies sell subscriptions to make money, and they sell ad time on their local, like Mediacom system. They sell ads as well. So they have two revenue streams. So just something to remember about local broadcasting. It's completely ad supported. Without advertisers, we would not exist.
So WTVM, when it is streamed by, say, a streaming service like Hulu,
yes.
Do they pay you?
Yes, they do. So that's the whole concept of retransmission fees or retransmission consent. And sometimes you hear about a station's fighting with a cable system, and the cable system says the local station's greedy, and so we're taking them off the air until we resolve this dispute, right? Well, we do deserve to be paid because, like I said, we're spending money covering the local community. Mediacom will not tell you there's a tornado coming down the street. They don't have a news team. They need us to provide local coverage of an area to make them relevant as a local viewer, for a local viewer. So think of it like I bake a pie and I cut it into 5 pieces and I give it to you because I baked it, and I'm giving it to you, my friends and neighbors. But if one of the neighbors takes my pie, cuts it up and sells it and says, I want $1 for every piece of pie, well, I made the pie. I bought the ingredients, I made the pie. Okay, you want to sell it to the neighbors? Give me 50 cents of your $1 slice. That's what retransmission consent is. These systems need us on their system to actually almost legally qualify as a community asset. For cable companies don't have a lot of rules, no one's regulating them, but a lot of times they want to be perceived as part of the community. One of the ways they do that is by airing local stations. So let's talk about lowest unit rate. It's kind of an interesting concept. So lowest unit rate is the lowest rate a station charges for a certain class of time. Remember I told you about classes of time. So let's say it's a non-preemptible spot. So it's guaranteed to run. Nothing can come in and push it out and preempt it. So that class of time, the lowest unit rate on that class of time might be $1,000. So that a buyer, someone who's buying TV time, can look at their budget and say, well, I've got $5,000, so I can use $1,000 to buy this spot in this great program at this time, and I know it will air, so I'm going to buy that class of time with that $1,000. But I'm going to go for other classes of time, the more preemptible or preemptible with notice time, and spend the rest of my money that way. So they can buy different classes of time. A lot of times people think advertisers have to be given the dirt cheap, lowest rates we have, and we have to give it to them that way, or we're breaking the law. That's not true. That's a misunderstanding of what's happening. So the options have to be provided, which is what we put on what we call our rate card. A very simple concept. It's like a menu in a restaurant. So it's got, spots that are preemptible, spots that are non-preemptible, spots from 9 to noon, spots just for the news, and there's different rates, for all these classes of time. So that's how we it's called managing inventory, not unlike inventory in a shoe store. You got 6 pairs of black, shoes that are fancy shoes, and when those are gone, they're gone. So if I sell 5 of them and I got 1 pair left, the price just went up because I can't get any more of those shoes. So that's our inventory. So I've got to manage that inventory to create enough revenue to support the station, which is very labor intensive. Everything we do, gathering news, very, very labor intensive. Besides the fact that technology has helped with a lot of things, people still need to know how to run that technology. And there is no chance in the world that a TV station is ever going to be fully automated unless it doesn't do any local programming. Then you probably could fully automate it, but not the way we do things today. Yeah.
If you have prime time and so much of it, the highest class of time.
Yeah.
What would be your lowest class of time, like 3 a.m. kind of stuff?
Yes, like overnights. Overnights would be a rotator, or you might buy a rotator for overnights. And it may air 3 or 4 times because if no one else is buying it, then that leaves more time for it to be plugged in and run again. So sometimes you might see spots that air and then it immediately airs again, and you're probably thinking, that's a mistake. Well, it probably is a mistake because it shouldn't really quite be like that. But if you see it once and then 2 spots later see it again, that's probably intentional because they've either bought a rotator or we haven't sold enough spots, so we got to repeat one. Not free, but based on how it's rotating. It's like this giant puzzle. So that's a really good question. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
In terms of equity of time, right? What do you guys have in place to be sure that the Warnock campaign can't come in and buy all of the good time for the next 2 months?
Exactly. Yes. And I touched on that a little bit coming up,
Okay.
but there, especially for federal candidates, and probably really only for federal candidates, there's a rule that you have to provide them access. So for instance, if the Warnock campaign came in and said, I want to buy up all these spots, so my competitor can't do it, we can't let that happen. That's against the law. We have to provide equal access. Now, by providing equal access, maybe the Herschel Walker campaign doesn't want to buy any ads. Well, that's okay. But I'm still not going to sell all my inventory to Warnock because I got to at least hope that the other side might want to do some advertising to balance it out. But in the meantime, I have all these other local clients that typically get pushed out during election season, and with political advertisers, local advertisers suffer. They get thrown off the air because they can't pay that $1,000 rate to make sure that their spot runs. So we lose some advertisers through political. People think it's, you make so much money with political, that $100,000 spot. Well, that was a fluke, like I told you, but that's really rare. It's like, the political, yes, it's probably more, we'll make more in 2022 revenue. We'll make more revenue than in 2023 coming up because 2023 is not a political year. So every 2 years, we make more money. The other thing about lowest unit rate is what I kind of outlined here. The advertiser, the way we figure lowest unit rate is looking at what another advertiser is currently paying for that same class of time. So like I said, 12 noon might be a different rate than 6 p.m. news, right? So you have to look at, and this is why we have to keep records, and record, kind of like for, maybe hopefully a lot of you don't have to file taxes yet, but the IRS makes you keep things for a number of years. Same thing with TV political advertising. So we need to look at what cleared during that same time period, and what and when it ran. So 7 to 8, 3 to 4. You have to look at all these things, and that's how we kind of make sure that it's equal. So in other words, my national sales manager would say to me, Warnock has bought nothing but the 6 o'clock news from now till election day. And we would have to step in and contact the campaign and tell them, you can't buy all the 6 o'clock news. You must be in another area as well, because I have to provide equal access at that time and at that same rate for the other guy, whether they come in or not. So that's kind of the concept there. Lowest unit rate is often misunderstood, but the key to knowing about it, and it's something that if you're ever in the financial side of television, sales and so forth, it's really, again, it's about how do you sell commercial time. People think that it's just like, well, this spot in the news is always $500, but it's not the case. It might be $500 today, but in January, when everyone spent their money and businesses are kind of like figuring out what's going to happen in 2023, maybe they're not going to spend with us. So, you have to really manage it. And then let's talk about censorship. This is my favorite topic. Like I said, I told a few people that I got a call yesterday from a viewer asking about this very thing. So the bottom line is that we cannot censor any political ads, and that's good. We shouldn't be able to censor any political ads. But what it also means is, we have no business censoring an ad, right? However, you have to be aware of what's in those ads, because it can have ripple effects. So it is illegal for a TV station to censor any ad for a federal office. That's Senate, House of Representatives, President. This does not apply to state or local offices. So in those cases, and we'll get to that in a second, but we could refuse to air a local spot, let's say for mayor. And I can explain why later, but we can refuse certain other non-candidate ads deemed to be obscene or portraying false information, but it has to be a non-candidate ad. A candidate can come on and say, so-and-so is an SOB and he's a liar and he cheated on his wife and he stole money, and that could be completely untrue. They can say it, and we have to run that spot. It's startling when you think about it, And sometimes with certain advertising, you can tell they're fudging it a little bit, or like they'll, a spot will cite a graphic, like let's say it's gas prices or something, and they'll make it look like it's either really high or really low. But if you really look at the graphic, it's a lie. It's basically they're trying to create an image in your mind from that quick ad that's a lasting image that, this person is a bad person. This person does not deserve my vote. That's what they're trying to do. And they will use pretty much any tactics, and they can. There's a very famous case several years ago, I have to say it was in the 90s, when a congressional candidate for the House of Representatives was an anti-abortion candidate, and that was his big thing. And so he created this ad that was extremely graphic and bloody and really, really, really graphic. It was so graphic that stations said they weren't going to air it. And the guy went to court and he won. And those stations had to air this ad with no disclaimer, no warning. They just had to run it. And it was a famous case because the guy can get away with it. He can do whatever he wants because he's a federal candidate. If he was running for governor, he can't get away with that. We can see a spot that's objectively where all of us would agree that is obscene, and we would say we're not going to run that, you know. And it wouldn't just be me deciding it. It would be me and my sales managers. I'd probably show my news director, say, what do you think of this? Is this, you know, but again, if you're a federal candidate, you can run anything you want. Yes.
So for the ads that you guys can make decisions on, like local office, that kind of thing, can you be legally held responsible if within the ad there's something like if someone said, Mayor so-and-so and so is a convicted child molester?
Great question.
Could you be held legally responsible since you have the option to deny the ad in the first place?
Great question. So for you're talking about for a non-federal candidate?
For a non-federal candidate, yes, ma'am.
Yes, and that's why we wouldn't run the ad. But for a federal candidate, we would not be responsible based on the rules of and the disclosure agreements we make them sign before they buy time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. But, you know, yes.
In fact, I think I can piggyback on that question because I had a similar thing because
Yeah. Oops.
in terms of this distinction between federal and local or federal and
Right.
non-federal,
Mm-hmm.
what is it that makes stations liable for the same false information or the same graphic content, but just because the class
Yeah.
of candidates is different?
Yeah.
Whether the, you know, I was thinking,
yeah.
you know, I teach media law,
Yeah.
and I could not figure which particular case that, you know, that decided this kind of distinction.
Yeah. I think because we don't have to run it, if we choose to run a non-federal candidate ad, then we're sort of saying, well, we're not necessarily endorsing it. We're saying, we know what's in this ad, and we're airing it anyway. Now, again, if it's a federal candidate, we know what it is. We're going to run it anyway because we have to. But if it's a non-federal candidate, the reason we could be liable is because we know he's calling someone a liar and a cheat, and we should have used our better judgment to make sure that, to the best of our ability, the ad is not a false portrayal. You know, it's a very gray area. It's a great question because it's a very gray area, and there are some stations that would say, "Well, I don't care what the guy says, we're going to run it." Well, if the other person decides to sue, you might lose your TV station. But on the other hand, maybe they won't sue, and that's kind of the gamble that you make. Yeah.
To kind of go with what he was saying, like at what point did they decide that federal was untouchable? Like, what is the difference between a federal ad, you know, and them being able to air whatever they want
It's-
and then it go, like,
It's the office. It's federal.
so they made up their own rule to say we can do whatever we want.
Political advertising rules are,
In terms of, you know,
yeah,
laws about libel and slander, there is a higher level. So private citizens
Yes.
versus public citizens.
right.
So maybe federal candidates are seen as public citizens,
Yeah.
whereas local candidates are seen as private citizens, and therefore the standards are different.
Yeah. And also, if you think about what the FCC and the Department of Justice and all the people that are involved with Congress in making these laws and figuring things out, what should be legal, what shouldn't, they're passing a national law. They're not passing a state law or a Columbus, Georgia municipal law. So they can only regulate federal offices. That's why the rules apply. You know, if a station wanted to say, you know what, we're going to adopt these rules for every office, doesn't matter. I mean, you might get away with it, but if I were a candidate for a state office, I'd say, no, you know, you don't have to run that ad of my opponent's because he's lying about me, and you know he's lying about me, and you don't have to run it. But if it's Senate or President, we have to run it just like they write it. There's no change we can make. Does that make sense? So the FCC deals only with broadcasting, which is really interesting because, you know, it appears that no censorship rule would apply to digital ads, but it's really never been litigated. No one's ever, we do that. We apply the same laws for federal candidates to digital ads. Do we have to? I don't know, but it's No one's ever tried it in court. I don't want to be the first one. So I'm not going to rock the boat, you know.
But I think this is a potential collaboration that TV stations and academics can in terms of pursuing this as a study area. Since there is no case
Right.
that is going to course, what is possible and who will be liable and
Yeah. It would be a really fascinating test case. So what else is it good to know, both as a citizen and also as a broadcast professional or communications professional? Stations have to disclose the political rules that I just talked about. So they have to disclose, the classes of time, not so much the rate they would charge, but they have to identify the classes of time. So in other words, if we're saying we're going to sell preemptible and non-preemptible time, and in the non-preemptible, we're going to sell time between 6 and 7 o'clock at night, that's likely to be a higher rate than 7 to 8 o'clock at night. And then 8 to 9 or 8 to 11, let's say prime time, is a totally different rate. We don't have to say what the rates are, but we have to disclose, again, those classes of time, because everyone has to be on the same playing field. Now, they may have different classes of time, but they have to at least acknowledge what those are, so that later, a candidate wants to buy something, you can't say, well, yeah, that's nice, but I just decided that our 6 o'clock news is worth $2,000 for non-preemptible in the first half of the news. That's BS. That's a made up, the station made that up to gouge the candidate. Can't do that. That's not allowed. So there are rules, and furthermore, we have to post every single political order that we take from every candidate on our FCC website. If you ever want to see anything interesting, you can go to search WTVM FCC site, and it'll come up, and there'll be a little icon on the left that looks kind of like a briefcase with a star on it. Those are all the political files. So when Warnock buys an ad with us, it's there. It shows the rate he paid, and it shows everything. It shows when it aired. We have to keep those records, but not only that, we have to make them public.
it's just almost like, political contribution, That's a kind of thing.
In a way, I mean, we don't have to,
Just in terms of the way
Yeah.
one is able to track those things. Who contributed to whom and how much kind of stuff.
They don't- yeah.
Which station advertised
right.
at what rate.
They probably should do that, but what they really use this for is to see how much money is spent. And they honestly don't, whoever's looking at this for the FCC, honestly, I believe, doesn't care who it is. They just kind of want to know, oh, Warnock spent more than Walker, that kind of thing. And I'll tell you right now that we have about almost $6 million on the books in political advertising through the end of election day. If there are runoffs, it'll be more. But our budget was about $4.5 million. So we're $1.5 million over budget, which is awesome. But remember, I've pushed out all these local advertisers, car dealers and restaurants, to make time for these political ads and promise the local people, hey, we'll catch up with you in 2023, we'll take care of you, we'll make sure you have ad time to buy and all that. And they agree, they know political is gonna push them out. They're not willing to pay what it costs to challenge a political ads placement. So they're okay with that. But we lose, if you think about it, if revenue was in different silos, in the end it's all together. But you look at local revenue from local merchants and businesses, then there's national revenue, which is things like McDonald's, national chains, Lazy Boy Furniture, that's a national spot. Then there's digital advertising, and then there's political advertising. So there's all these different silos. But in the end, it just matters like what's the final number. So if we budgeted, say for the whole year, to make $15 million, if we know 6 or 7 million is political, then we know we got other revenue from these other sources and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's kind of, you know, something to remember, is that political advertising seems like a windfall. And sometimes you hear pundits talk about, oh, you know, the local stations are making a windfall. They don't deserve this kind of money. Well, you know, we're paying the electric bill. We're getting the signal out to our viewers. That's what the politicians are paying for. They need us to distribute the message. And oftentimes people say, well, why do politicians buy TV? Like, no one watches TV anymore. Even though we were talking about that earlier, we all watch TV in different ways now. Why do they buy TV? Because it works. It works so well that since the advent of television advertising, you know, it's worked. If you guys have ever heard about the Daisy ad, that was, yeah, it was an ad against Barry Goldwater when he ran for president in 1964. And it's a little girl basically pulling the flowers off a daisy, and then at the end there's a big nuclear bomb blast because they thought he was going to, you know, nuke everyone. That was a very, you know, stellar example of a political ad that was very, very effective. So anyway, I'm digressing. But so the FCC has the power to order rebates to candidates. Like, let's say we did do something wrong, and the Warnock campaign called the FCC and said, you know, that WTVM, they're not playing by the rules. The FCC would investigate. We'd probably have to pay a fine if we were guilty. We might not be guilty. We'd have a chance to say, no, he's misunderstanding what happened, and everything would be fine. But that's the power the FCC has. And by the way, the FCC is the one that grants a television station its license to broadcast. Without a license to broadcast, a television station is just a place with a lot of technology and cameras. It's the license to broadcast that allows you to sell advertising time and sell political advertising in particular. And then finally, we have to inform, you know, candidates that these are the rules, so they understand what they have to do. Yes, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, great, perfect. So what else should we know? We already talked about this. We have to upload all of the files. Political ads are paid for in advance. That's another thing we should know. I think it's kind of interesting. If the spot doesn't run, we do have to send the candidate a rebate. We literally wait for the check to come in from the campaign before we schedule the spot to run. So that's why they pay in advance. So let's see, if the spot doesn't run, oh, I already said that. We have to do, immediately send a rebate. I think that's it. Sydney, I think that's it. Yeah. So that was good timing. But any other questions? I mean, I was saying before that I think, I know I said this to Marion a couple times, but I think informed citizens should know about this stuff. And I was a government major. Like, I got into TV because I was waiting to go to law school, and I got in, but before that, I got this cool job making nothing at a TV station in Albany, New York, after I got out of college. And that first day I thought, ooh, this might be kind of interesting. And then I deferred going to law school. And when you defer a third time, they make you take the law boards again and apply again, at least back in those days. And I said, and I became a reporter and a producer and a news director. I just realized it could be kind of a fun job. And I've literally learned every single thing I know. I've gotten every single job I've gotten as I climbed the ladder from doing it. It's an industry where you can still learn by getting that first job and being in the whole system of broadcasting and local TV. You can get a job like that as a production assistant and work your way up as high as you want to go, really. I mean, I think that's a really cool part of it. Like I said, I don't have a communications degree. I wish I did. I was a government major. So back in those days, there were journalism degrees you can get, but that was all about writing for newspapers back then. I'm talking like 1980. No one even had a glimmer of a dream about the internet back then. And TV was very male dominated, very non-diverse, it's a lot has changed, and actually women have been major beneficiaries, and people of color too, as it should be. But it's a great business to go into, and we are honestly, we hire people right out of college. We do prefer college grads just because we think they're a little bit more exposed to the world and have read more or learned more, you know, and again, it doesn't have to be with a communications degree, although that's fantastic. But anyway, this is a great industry, and if you want to know more about it, you know, let me know. And if you ever want to be an intern, I know we do internships usually in the fall and then in the spring. So, any other questions or anything? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you, Sydney. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Holly Steuart, the Vice President General Manager of WTVM, News Leader 9.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you
time.
so much.
Thank you all for showing up. If you haven't signed in, make sure that you do. And thank you all so much for participating in this talk. Don't forget, this coming Thursday, we have another one. So if you haven't gotten your fill of political communication and media speech, now's the time to get even more. It's awesome. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.